Now, what do you think sets the UN General Assembly 2023 apart from previous ones?
I think in the context of Africa, two big themes. One would be the climate change or climate crisis that you had alluded to earlier. But also the second question is this about African representation in multilateral frameworks that a lot of the presidents from the continent who addressed the UN spoke to.
Now, Professor, what's your assessment on how the leaders addressed the strategic development goals?
Right. So the strategic development goals, there's 17 of those. I think they addressed them verbally in terms of their speeches, but let's not forget there's 17 of them. So, for example, the first one is on poverty. The fifth one relates to gender equality, which is the issue you previously just talked about. And because there's so many, there's 17 of these strategic development goals, it's difficult to coordinate them. But I think these multilateral frameworks really allow us to have another forum where government leaders can speak and better integrate their policies. But it's still a big challenge because of poverty is increasing, gender inequality is increasing, and a lot of these goals seem that they might not be met by the deadline of 2030, which is coming up very soon.
Professor, I think you agree with me that Africa now has a different seat on the table. They are now the key members now of the G20, the United Nations Security Council, and also the BRICS. But what are the African leaders going to be taking back from UNGA to the continent?
I think they will be taking back the idea that there is space for multilateral cooperation where countries can work together. But I think going back to the continent, our leaders can also really look to improve on the idea of Africa having one voice, because it really seems that a lot of the African countries spoke around their different individual interests and on particular key issues. For example, commitments of the developing world on climate change that was spoken to in the Nairobi Declaration of the Africa Climate Summit. This was not really raised as a common continental issue. And I think more broadly, that broader issue of support, specific support in terms of technology to the continent, to the blue and green economies. I think these are something that can be accentuated and spoken in one voice more clearly by the leaders of our African continent in future UN General Assembly summits.
And briefly, Professor, what about security issues on the continent? We've seen those coups in West Africa, the chaos in Sudan. How does that come together for African leaders to put their heads together on how to address this crisis?
That's an excellent point. So this then comes back to the question of having a better coordination on these security questions. Think, for example, about the war in the DRC. The president of the DRC wants the UN peacekeepers to leave immediately, but there's no regional consensus in terms of the way forward to end the war in that region. So I think going forward, these through SADC, through the East African Community, through COMESA, through security bodies, I think these are areas through which African presidents and leaders can create some kind of voice to speak to these security issues that tend to create more chaos when you have war and instability, and our lack of a capacity to meet the strategic development goals for 2030.